The sound of shattering glass has a finality to it that echoes long after the silence returns. It wasn't just the sound of my car being demolished. It was the sound of my life, my marriage, my trust, all being systematically smashed into unrecognizable shards. I stood there in the B2 parking garage, the cold, damp air clinging to my skin, watching two vehicles sit amid the glittering wreckage. One was the sleek black SUV that had, until this morning, been my pride and joy, and the mobile crime scene of my husband's betrayal. Now it was a crumpled heap of metal and broken windows. The other was the rusty three-wheeled cargo trike I used for my weekend wanton stall, looking pathetically resilient beside the destruction. My phone buzzed in my hand, a violent tremor against my palm. A message from David. Maya, you need to remember your place. Without me, you'll be selling wontons on the street for the rest of your life. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, hollow and sharp in the cavernous garage. This was his solution. Not an apology, not an explanation, but a demonstration of power. He had my car, the one containing the dash cam with its damning cloud backup, obliterated. He thought he was erasing the evidence, crushing my spirit and putting me back in what he considered my proper station. Beneath him, the security guard, old Mr. Chin, hovered nervously. Miss Sharma, I'm so sorry. I only stepped away for a moment. It's not your fault, Mr. Chin, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Some things are just meant to be broken. As he walked away, shaking his head, I ran my fingers over the cracked leather seat of the trike. David was right about one thing. I would be selling wontons. But not in the way he imagined. If he wanted a spectacle, I would give him one he'd never forget. The discovery had happened just 2 days ago, a lifetime compressed into 48 hours. It started with a small, innocuous rectangle of cardboard left behind like a taunt. A box of condoms, half empty, nestled in the footwell of the SUV's back seat. David had used the car for a client meeting the night before. My stomach had clenched, but I'd clung to a thread of hope. Maybe it was a client's. A male client. David was always so fastidious, so controlled. He was a rising star at Titan Capital, a man who prided himself on his impeccable image. Infidelity seemed messy beneath him. I'd decided to be direct. Over lunch at our pristine marble breakfast bar, I slid the box across the smooth surface. This must be yours. Probably dropped by a client. He hadn't even flinched. He just smiled, that charming, dismissive smile that had once made my heart flutter. Silly girl. Of course it is. If you don't believe me, check the dash cam yourself this afternoon. His confidence was a weapon and it almost worked. But a woman's intuition, once awakened, is a more relentless detective than any Holmes. The moment he left for the gym, I sent a message to the one person I thought I could trust completely. My best friend Chloe. Chloe, can you do some digging for me? See who David met with yesterday. I have a bad feeling. The second after I hit send, David's phone, left charging on the counter, lit up with a notification. A wave of cold dread washed over me so violently I had to grip the edge of the counter. The preview on the screen was from Chloe. David, sweetheart, Maya just checked on us. What should I say? The world tilted. My breath hitched. I fumbled with his passcode, our anniversary, and the phone unlocked, opening a gateway to hell. I scrolled up and the dense, explicit chat history struck me like a physical blow. It wasn't just flirting. It was planning. It was reminiscing. David, your back must be so sore from yesterday. Poor baby. Let's get a hotel room next time. Don't tease me in the car wearing lace like that. You're a menace. I can't stop thinking about you. Is she out? The messages were a nauseating tapestry of their affair, woven with threads of my own ignorance. But more than David's betrayal, it was Chloe's that froze the blood in my veins. Chloe, whose father's life-saving surgery I had paid for. Chloe, whom I had helped get a job as David's personal assistant. My best friend since university. The maid of honor at my wedding. When David returned from the gym, whistling, I had already placed his phone exactly as I found it. I swallowed the acid rising in my throat, the bitterness coating my raw insides. I decided, in a moment of foolish, heartbroken grace, to give them one last chance. Are you sure it was a client? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There's a dash cam in the car, you know. He had walked over, cupped my face in his hands and pressed a warm, lingering kiss to my forehead. The intimacy felt like a violation. Of course, Maya. Don't be so paranoid. You can check it this afternoon. And then the call from security. My car. Beaten to a pulp. The evidence, or so he thought, destroyed. His message was clear. Know your place. Standing in the wreckage, I knew my place now. It wasn't as his meek, obedient wife. It was as the architect of his downfall. That evening I didn't go home. I went to my storage unit and pulled out the wanton stall equipment. The next day I set up shop directly across the street from the gleaming tower of Titan Capital. I wasn't hiding. I was declaring war. Beside the stall I propped up a life-sized cardboard cutout of David in his best suit, a grotesque parody of his success. Then I started a live stream. Fans get 20% off. I called out cheerfully to the camera, ladling steaming broth. Eat while it's hot. My dear husband's got a mistress lately. Guess what? The mistress is my very own best friend, practically keeping it in the family. I need to make some extra cash. If Chloe ends up pregnant, I'll have to nurse her through her confinement. The stream shot to the top of the trending list. The internet exploded. A brave viewer came for an interview. Mrs. Roy, is this your company's new line of business? I smiled, a sharp, brittle thing. Oh, it's a personal venture. And if you repost and tag Mark, you get 50% off. Mark was Chloe's husband, a kind, suspicious man David had always mocked. I was pulling everyone into the spectacle. David's retaliation was swift. City inspectors, undoubtedly under his influence, came and confiscated my stall that very night. When I finally returned home, he was waiting, our wedding photo shattered at his feet. Maya, have you no shame? He roared, his face contorted with a fury I'd never seen directed at me. You dare to do these shameless things? Shameless. I echoed, my voice dangerously calm. Now the whole country knows just how disgraceful you two are. His hand trembled as he lit a cigarette. He shook his head, a picture of wounded righteousness. If you weren't so forceful, so demanding, maybe I wouldn't have fallen for Chloe. I let out a laugh that held no humor, only the ache of a bleeding heart. He was blaming me. My strength, my personality, had driven him into the arms of my gentle, compliant best friend. The audacity was breathtaking. David, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. You'll see me get even crazier. My revenge has only just begun. I turned and walked away, but not before I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. He had expected me to break, to weep, to beg. He hadn't expected a fighter. That night, Chloe posted on her social media, "The one who is unloved is the real third wheel." I read it in the dark, alone in our king-sized bed. I could imagine them together, entangled, laughing at the fool I was. The two people I had trusted most had each taken a knife and carved me open. But as I lay there, a familiar profile picture popped up on my screen. It was Mark. Without a moment's hesitation, I selected every filthy screenshot, every vile message between David and Chloe, and hit send. There was a long silence, then his reply came. "How should I work with you?" I typed my answer, my fingers steady for the first time in days. "Let's join forces. Let's give them a gift they'll never forget." The game was on. The city inspectors took my stall, but they couldn't take my resolve. David thought he had won the first round, that his display of power had cowed me. What he didn't understand was that by destroying my car, he had liberated me. He had severed the last tether of the life I thought I had, the life of Maya Rui, devoted wife. Now I was just Maya, a woman with nothing left to lose and a burning desire for retribution. Mark's message was a lifeline thrown into my private ocean of despair. How should I work with you? It was simple, direct, and devoid of the emotional hysterics that had characterized my interactions with David. It was the voice of a man who had also been betrayed, who understood that grief was a luxury that could only be afforded after justice was served. I met him the next day at a quiet, anonymous cafe far from the city's financial district. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him at a couple's dinner, his kind eyes shadowed with a new, grim determination. There was no small talk. "They're careful," he said, stirring his black coffee. "But they're also arrogant. Chloe thinks she's untouchable now that she has him." "David thrives on control," I replied. "But he's vulnerable this week. Titan Capital's Investor Gala is on Friday. It's the most important event of his year. He's been courting a major investor, a Mr. Arthur Reed, for months. If anything goes wrong, his entire 5-year plan collapses. A slow, understanding smile spread across Mark's face. It wasn't a pleasant sight. So, we ensure something goes wrong. Spectacularly, I agreed. But first I had to get into the gala. David had made it clear I was persona non grata, an embarrassment to be hidden away. He didn't know that the investor he so desperately wanted to impress, Arthur Reed, was the same man who used to sit on a wobbly stool at my grandmother's wonton stall, his laughter booming as he slurped down bowl after bowl. Uncle Arthur, as I'd called him since childhood, was my father's oldest friend. They had served together, and when my father, Robert Sharma, built his business empire, Arthur was his fiercest ally. After my father's semi-retirement, Arthur became a venture capital legend in his own right. He was a bachelor with no children, and he had doted on me since I was a little girl. The day I met David, it was at that very stall. I was helping my grandmother, keeping her memory alive, and Uncle Arthur was there, as he often was, for a taste of nostalgia. David, young, brash, and breathtakingly handsome, had appeared like a character from a movie, clutching a project proposal. He had been trying to get a meeting with Arthur for weeks. That day, Arthur was about to send him away with another polite refusal, but he saw the way I looked at David, a mix of curiosity and instant attraction, and he changed his tactic. He made David come to the stall every day for a month to report his progress. It was a test, one I didn't understand at the time. For that month I played the part of the wanton girl, and David, the determined entrepreneur, played his part to perfection. He was charming, respectful, and seemingly unfazed by the humble setting. I fell for the performance, hook, line, and sinker. When my parents discovered our relationship, they were vehemently opposed. They saw a calculating ambition in David that I, blinded by love, mistook for drive. They forbade me from revealing our family's wealth, fearing he was a gold digger. I, in my youthful rebellion, saw them as snobbish and stubborn. I defied them, married David in secret using a stolen household register, and vowed to build a life with him on our own terms. In his eyes, my family were simple food vendors, a fact I never corrected. I wore my struggle like a badge of honor, a proof of our pure love. Now that lie was the foundation of his contempt for me. I called Uncle Arthur. "Maya, my dear girl." His voice was a warm rumble down the line. "I've been hearing some interesting things. The wanton stall was just the opening act, Uncle." I told him everything. The condoms, the messages, the smashed car, Chloe's betrayal. I didn't leave out a single painful detail. There was a long silence on the other end, and when he spoke again, his voice was cold steel. "He did this to Robert Sharma's daughter?" he said, the words dripping with icy fury. "The boy I pulled out of the gutter. He dares." "I need to be at that gala, Uncle Arthur." "You will be," he promised. "And you'll have the best seat in the house." The night of the gala, I wore a simple but elegant black dress I had bought before my self-imposed exile from high society. I didn't look like a wanton seller. I looked like I belonged. David's security detail tried to stop me at the entrance of the Grand Hotel ballroom, but a discreet nod from Uncle Arthur's personal assistant cleared my path. I saw David before he saw me. He was holding court, his arm draped possessively around Chloe's waist. She was radiant in a custom-made gown, playing the part of the elegant companion to perfection. She laughed at something a board member said, a tinkling, artificial sound that made my skin crawl. They were a picture of success, the golden couple. Then David's eyes met mine across the crowded room. The smile froze on his face. The color drained from his cheeks, replaced by a flush of pure panic. He excused himself and strode toward me, grabbing my arm with a force that would leave bruises. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, his breath smelling of expensive whiskey. "Are you trying to ruin me?" "You did a fine job of that yourself, David," I said calmly, prying his fingers from my arm. "I'm just here to witness the aftermath." His fury was a palpable heat. "You need to leave. No. Mr. Reed is here. This is not the time for your hysterics." "Oh, I wouldn't dream of missing Mr. Reed," I said, smiling sweetly. "I'm his plus one." The confusion on his face was almost comical. Before he could process it, Uncle Arthur himself approached us. David immediately switched gears, his face morphing into an obsequious mask of respect. "Mr. Reed. Sir, it's an honor to have you here. I hope you're finding everything to your liking." Uncle Arthur ignored him, turning to me instead. "Maya, my dear, you look lovely. That dress brings out the fire in your eyes." He leaned in and kissed my cheek. David stared, his jaw slack. You know each other? Yo her. Uncle Arthur boomed, drawing the attention of nearby guests. I changed this one's diapers. Her father is my oldest friend. Robert Sharma? Ring a bell. The name hit David like a physical blow. Robert Sharma. The reclusive billionaire. The man whose approval David would have killed for in his early days. I saw the calculations flashing behind his eyes, the rapid reassessment of my worth, the dawning horror of what he had thrown away. The woman he had derided as a street vendor was the daughter of a man whose fortune could buy his company 100 times over. But the wanton's stall, he stammered, utterly lost, was my grandmother's legacy, I finished for him. A legacy you mocked. A past you thought made me inferior. Chloe had wandered over, sensing the tension. Her smile was brittle. Maya, what a surprise. I didn't know you were invited. Her eyes darted between David's ashen face and Uncle Arthur's stern one. Some surprises are more pleasant than others, Chloe, I said. Just then the music cut off. The master of ceremonies was announcing David's big moment, his presentation to the investors. The giant screen at the front of the hall lit up, ready to display his carefully crafted promotional video. But instead of sleek graphics, the screen flickered and showed grainy surveillance footage. It was Lily's mother, her hands on her hips, shouting to a neighbor in their cramped apartment hallway. My Chloe is capable enough to hook the big boss. That Maya, what is she? How could she ever compete with my daughter for a man? The hall erupted in gasps and whispers. Chloe's face turned the color of chalk. Turn it off, she shrieked, but the footage only cut faster. Now it was her younger brother lounging on a new sofa. That dumb best friend doesn't even know her husband's business trips are always with my sister. My sis says her man's a beast in bed, way stronger than my brother-in-law. Pandemonium. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Chloe, in a blind panic, tried to rush the stage, but her towering heels betrayed her. She stumbled and fell in a heap of expensive fabric, wailing uncontrollably. She pointed a shaking finger at me. You did this. Mark's voice, cold and clear, cut through the noise from the sound system. You said your father's health was bad and asked me to install those cameras. That's the only reason I saw your true face. You disgust me. David stood frozen, a statue of humiliation. Then, as if waking from a trance, he pushed through the crowd, scooped up a sobbing Chloe and shielded her from the cameras. He turned his head and his eyes found mine. They were filled with a hatred so pure it was almost awe-inspiring. Is this what you wanted? He snarled, his voice low and venomous. This is only the beginning, David, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. He carried Chloe out of the ballroom, the investors and colleagues he had worked so hard to impress staring after them with a mixture of pity and disgust. The golden couple was tarnished, their glittering facade shattered beyond repair. As the chaos swirled around me, Uncle Arthur placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. It's done, Maya. Let me handle these two from here. Just say the word and I'll have the divorce papers drawn up. I looked at the empty space where David had stood, at the shattered image on the screen, and at the ruins of my marriage displayed for all to see. A strange emptiness settled over me. I shook my head. No, Uncle Arthur. I'm not done. A divorce would let him off too easily. I want his fortune. I want him to feel every ounce of the humiliation I've felt. I want him and Chloe to be utterly ruined. He looked at me, at the determined glint in my eyes, and after a long moment he simply nodded. All right, my dear. Whatever you want to do, I'll support you. The battle was far from over. In fact, the war had just begun. The days after the gala were a study in eerie silence. The storm had been unleashed, the headlines were brutal. Titan Capital's golden boy in sex and lies scandal, mistress exposed at investor gala. But David's response was a void. No furious calls, no legal threats. It was the calm after the explosion, and it was more unnerving than the blast itself. I knew David. This wasn't surrender. It was recalibration. He was a chess player and he was assessing the new, shocking power of the piece he had so carelessly underestimated. Me. I stayed in a sleek, anonymous hotel suite paid for by Uncle Arthur. My old home, the apartment I had shared with David, felt like a contaminated site. Every surface held the ghost of his betrayal. Mark and I communicated through encrypted channels, a necessary precaution. David was too proud to beg, but he was not above espionage. My phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number, but the venom was familiar. You think you've won? You're just a spiteful bitch who can't accept that he never loved you. Chloe. Her public humiliation had stripped away the performative gentleness, revealing the feral creature beneath. I didn't respond. Let her stew. Let her insecurity fester in the silence David was undoubtedly giving her as he licked his wounds and plotted. My revenge needed a new vector. Public shaming was effective, but it was ephemeral. The business world had a short memory for scandal, provided the money kept flowing. I needed something that would strike at the heart of David's empire. His control, his reputation, and his finances. And for that I needed leverage he couldn't ignore. The leverage arrived in the form of a photograph. It was a close-up sent from the same unknown number. It was my jade bracelet. Not just any bracelet. It was a deep, imperial green heirloom passed down from my great-grandmother. It was cool and heavy on the wrist, and it held the weight of generations. My grandmother had given it to me on my wedding day, her eyes misty. "This is for strength, Maya," she'd whispered. "The women in our family are like jade. We can be polished, but we are never broken." David knew what it meant to me. He had seen me wear it only on the most important occasions, treating it with a reverence he never understood. In the photo, the bracelet was dangling from Chloe's fingers, her garishly manicured nails a stark contrast to the stone's serene beauty. The message followed. "If you don't want it broken, come to the Grand Majestic Hotel. Penthouse Suite. Now." A cold fury, purer and more focused than any I had felt before, settled in my chest. This was no longer about infidelity. This was a desecration. He was using the most sacred piece of my history as a bargaining chip. He knew I would come. It was a trap, but it was also an invitation. He wanted to confront me on his terms, in a place of his choosing, to reassert his dominance. I called Mark. "He's taken the bait." "The jade bracelet." Mark's response was immediate. "I'll be there. I'll handle the recording. You just handle them." I dressed carefully. A tailored navy blue pantsuit. Armor. I looked like the daughter of Robert Sharma, a force to be reckoned with, not the heartbroken wanton seller David expected. I slipped a small voice-activated recorder into my pocket, a backup plan. Mark would be positioned outside, ensuring the hotel's own security feeds were accommodating. When I pushed open the heavy door to the penthouse suite, the scene was a meticulously staged tableau of decadence. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the cloying scent of Chloe's perfume. David sat at the head of a low table littered with bottles of vintage wine and half-eaten plates of gourmet food. Chloe was draped over him, her body language a parody of possession. A few of David's sycophantic junior executives were there, laughing obsequiously at some unheard joke. They fell silent when I entered. "Hiya," David drawled, not bothering to stand. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "So glad you could join our little celebration. I was just telling the team how resilient you've been." Chloe giggled, a high nervous sound. She held up the jade bracelet, letting it catch the light. "You mean this old thing? David said you wouldn't come, but I told him since it was David who asked, how could you not give him face?" My eyes were locked on the bracelet. I could see the intricate dragon and phoenix carving, a symbol of eternal harmony. The irony was acid in my throat. David's voice was a lazy, indifferent whip. "Why are you just standing there? Come and take your trinket back." With a theatrical flourish, Chloe pinched the bracelet between two fingers. She made a show of examining it, then pretended to fumble. The bracelet slipped from her grasp and hit the marble floor with a sickening, definitive crack. It shattered into 3 large pieces and several smaller shards. The room froze. A red haze descended over my vision. The cold fury ignited into an inferno. Without a thought, I grabbed the nearest heavy object, a crystal decanter of whiskey, and hurled it with all my strength. It wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at the space she occupied. The bottle smashed against the wall behind her, showering her in glass and liquor. Shards nicked her cheek, drawing thin lines of blood. As she screamed, I was already on her. I seized a handful of her perfectly styled hair and yanked her head back. "You vile creature," I snarled, my voice low and guttural. "You know what that meant to me. How dare you?" David moved faster than I thought possible. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands closing around my arms like vices, pulling me off her. He shoved me back, putting his body between us, shielding her. The concern on his face as he looked at the tiny cut on Chloe's cheek was more painful than any physical blow. "Maya, enough," he roared. His chest was heaving. He looked at me, at my disheveled hair and wild eyes, and his expression twisted into one of profound disgust. Instinctively, his hand rose, open-palmed, ready to strike. I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, glaring at him, daring him to do it. My silence was a challenge. His hand hovered in the air, trembling with suppressed violence. Then slowly he lowered it. He gave a cold, contemptuous laugh. "Look at you," he said, his voice dripping with scorn. "When did you turn into such a shrew, Maya? You weren't like this before. This is ridiculous." The words were meant to wound, to shame me back into submission. He was parading his mistress in front of me, yet he had the audacity to be disappointed in my behavior. He wanted me to be the graceful, defeated wife, to accept my fate with quiet dignity. He couldn't comprehend that he had created this monster. One of his lackeys, a weaselly man named Kevin, found his voice. "Miss Sharma, without Mr. Roy you're nothing. You should be grateful he's even talking to you." I ignored him. My gaze was fixed on David. I knelt and carefully gathered the broken pieces of my grandmother's bracelet, my hands trembling not with weakness, but with a rage so intense it threatened to consume me. As I stood, cradling the green shards in my palm, I turned to leave. But David grabbed my arm again, his grip bruising. "What's the matter?" he taunted, raising an eyebrow. "Can't listen to the truth?" He leaned in close, his breath hot on my ear, his voice a malicious whisper. "Even if you can't stand it, you have to. You need to face reality. You're nothing to me now." At that moment, the suite door opened again. Mark stood there, his face an impassive mask. His timing was impeccable. I slipped my arm through Mark's. "Sorry for calling you in this mess," I murmured as we walked away. "It's fine," he said quietly, his voice steady. The broken jade bracelet sat on my hotel dresser, a silent, potent reminder. It was no longer just an heirloom. It was a symbol. David and Chloe had crossed a line from betrayal into sacrilege, and my resolve hardened into something cold, sharp, and unyielding. Sentiment was a luxury I could no longer afford. This was a business transaction now, and I was here to collect what was owed. The following morning, I dressed with the precision of a general going to war. A crisp white shirt, tailored black trousers, a blazer with sharp lines. I looked every inch the formidable shareholder I was about to become. I had a delivery truck meet me at the entrance of the Titan Capitol building. 30 large thermal boxes, each filled with steaming bowls of wontons. But these were no ordinary takeout containers. I'd spent the previous evening with a designer, creating large waterproof labels. Each label featured a blown-up, crystal-clear screenshot of the most damning messages between David and Chloe. "I'm not wearing anything underneath today. Your office. 3 p.m. Chloe. The door will be unlocked. Don't keep me waiting. David. I love it when you're forceful. It's so much better than with her. Chloe." The receptionist in the gleaming marble lobby gaped as the delivery men started stacking the boxes. "Miss Sharma. You can't. Mr. Roy's orders." I didn't even break stride. I pulled a document from my portfolio and held it up. It was my shareholder certificate, proving I owned a not insignificant portion of Titan Capital, shares I'd inherited quietly from a family trust. "Today's employee welfare is on me," I announced, my voice carrying across the lobby. "Is there a problem? Do you want to block a shareholder from boosting employee morale?" Just then the elevator dinged and Chloe stepped out. She was wearing a new, outrageously expensive designer dress, a blatant trophy from David. The moment she saw the lobby transformed into a makeshift wanton stall, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and contempt. "Maya," she sneered, her voice shrill. "Have you gone completely mad with poverty? You call this street stall garbage company benefits?" She strutted forward, waving a dismissive hand. "Yesterday, David ordered me a Michelin star breakfast. One set was worth more than 10 of your pathetic little bowls. Who would even want to eat this cheap junk?" But before the last word left her mouth, employees, drawn by the aroma and the commotion, began to trickle out of their offices. They saw the boxes. They saw the labels. A hush fell over the growing crowd as they read the explicit messages. The chatter died, replaced by awkward coughs and the rustle of clothing as people shifted uncomfortably. A young intern, her face pale, looked from the box in her hands to Chloe's triumphant expression. "Secretary Lynn," she whispered, her voice trembling with nervous disbelief. Are these chat logs real? Did you and Mr. Roy really, in the office?" Chloe's face went from triumphant to paper white in a second. A strangled sound escaped her throat. She lunged for the box, her manicured claws tearing at the label. "It's a lie. A forgery. She's trying to destroy us." I caught her wrist midair, my grip like iron. "Tear it? What? Are you afraid people will see the messages you sent yourself?" I shook my phone, the screen displaying the complete unedited chat history between her and David, time-stamped and undeniable. The elevator dinged again. This time it was David. He took in the scene. The crowded lobby, the wanton boxes, Chloe's hysterics, my restraining grip on her arm, and his face darkened into a thundercloud. "What is the meaning of this?" he barked, his voice cutting through the tension. "Why aren't you all working? This is an office, not a food court." The employees scattered like startled birds, shoving the incriminating boxes into drawers and under desks, not daring to meet his eyes. Chloe burst into theatrical tears and hid behind him, clutching his arm. "David, she's harassing me. She's spreading vile lies." David's eyes, burning with a cold fire, locked onto mine. "Why, my office. Now." I released Chloe's wrist and followed him, my head held high. His office was a monument to his success. Floor-to-ceiling windows, rich mahogany, shelves lined with books I had given him. My eyes went to the corner of his desk. Our wedding photo still sat there, but my face had been scribbled over with thick black marker. The childish vandalism was undoubtedly Chloe's work, a petty attempt to erase me. David stood at the window, his back to me, his shoulders tense. After a long moment he spoke, and his voice was unervingly gentle, layered with a false nostalgia that made my skin crawl. "You once said we'd watch the sunrise from this office for the rest of our lives," he said, turning to face me. The anger was gone, replaced by a mask of weary sadness. "It's only been 5 years, Maya. How did it all change?" "You changed, David," I replied, my voice flat. "Not me. I'm still the woman who believed in you. You're the one who became a stranger." His expression darkened again, the mask slipping. After a heavy silence he walked to his desk, opened a drawer and pulled out a document. He slid it across the polished surface toward me. It was a divorce agreement. "Maya," he said, his tone now all business. "Let's stop torturing each other. It's over." He paused and then delivered the line he clearly thought was his trump card. "She's pregnant." I didn't touch the papers. Instead, I picked up my phone, swiped through a few files and slid it back across the desk toward him. On the screen played a video from a hotel's hallway surveillance. It showed Chloe, clearly drunk, being half-carried, half-led into a room by a balding, middle-aged man I recognized as one of David's rivals. The timestamp was from just a few weeks ago. I let the video play for a moment before speaking. "Do you have some kind of fetish for being cheated on, David? You still want to raise another man's child?" My voice was lethally calm. "I suggest you get a paternity test before you embarrass yourself any further." The color drained from his face as he stared at the screen. The confident facade crumbled completely, revealing the insecure man beneath. I turned and walked out, leaving him standing there, clutching the edge of his desk, the unspoken question hanging in the air like a poison gas. That night he came to my hotel room. He threw the divorce agreement on the table. "Sign it," he demanded, yanking off his tie. "Her belly's already starting to show. If word gets out, it'll be a disaster for the company." I picked up the papers and, without a word, slowly and deliberately tore them in half, then into quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the floor like confetti. "That bitch will take my place over my dead body," I said, my voice low and steady. "And if that bastard in her stomach dares to be born, I'll throw it to the dogs myself." The violence of my words shocked even me, but they had the desired effect. He lunged at me, shoving me hard against the wall. "Haven't you made enough of a scene?" he roared, his knee digging into my back. "A scene?" I laughed, the sound wild and unhinged. "I'll make a scene at your company. I'll make a scene in front of your parents. I'll let the whole world know you're an ungrateful bastard. I'll make sure Chloe is pointed at and spat on wherever she goes. I'll make sure her child never lifts its head, forever branded as the spawn of a mistress. He suddenly released me, looming over me with a chilling, calculated calm. The anger was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Utter ruthlessness. "You think any of that can stop me?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It only makes me hate you more." He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "Sign the papers and I'll give you 20 million. Enough to keep you fed and clothed for life. Don't sign, and I have 100 ways to strip you of everything and leave you facing lawsuits that will bury you." His fingertip traced a mocking, tender line down my cheek. "After all, we did have some good times. I don't want to see you thrown out on the street like a dog." Those words were the final nail in the coffin of any lingering affection. I looked into his eyes, saw the utter contempt he held for me, and something in me snapped. I lunged forward and sank my teeth into the finger that had touched my face. I bit down until I tasted the metallic tang of his blood. He cried out in pain and shock, wrenching his hand away. I laughed through the tears that finally spilled over. 20 million, David? Are you trying to buy off a beggar?" I stood up, dusting myself off, a strange, icy calm settling over me. "I'll sign. But on one condition." He frowned, cradling his injured hand. "What condition?" "Come with me to the bridge underpass. The one where we first met. We'll set up the wanton stall one last time." He stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. But I could see the calculation in his eyes. He thought it was a moment of weakness, a nostalgic plea. He thought he had won. "Fine," he said, a slow, condescending smile spreading across his lips. "For old time's sake." He had no idea that for me it wasn't about old times. It was about closure. And it was about setting the stage for his final and most public humiliation. The night air under the bridge was thick with the ghosts of memory. It smelled of damp concrete, diesel fumes from the nearby road, and the rich, savory scent of pork and ginger from my broth. The shabby trike was set up exactly as it had been years ago, a little island of humble warmth in the cold, impersonal city. David stood a few feet away, rigid in his tailored cashmere coat, looking like a tourist who had taken a disastrous wrong turn. He was utterly, profoundly out of place. I worked in silence, kneading the dough, folding the wontons with practiced, automatic motions. The rhythmic clang of the ladle against the pot was the only sound between us for a long time. The city's noise was a distant hum, a backdrop to our private, tense stage. "Why, he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. "You did this on purpose." I didn't look up from the bubbling pot. "Did what on purpose, David? Remind you of where you came from? Remind you of the man you were before you decided you were too good for all this?" I dropped a batch of wontons into the boiling water. "You're overthinking it. Your conscience was fed to the dogs a long time ago." His low growl of frustration drew the attention of the only other customer, a grizzled old man hunched over a bowl at the single rickety table. The man peered at David through thick glasses, a slow recognition dawning on his weathered face. "Well, I'll be," the man chuckled, a gap-toothed smile spreading. "If it isn't young David. Back in the day, you squatted right here on that very curb, chasing after the wanton beauty, swearing you'd drag her home even if you had to tie her up." He winked at me. "Guess you finally married her, eh?" I kept my eyes on my work, my face a mask of indifference. David said nothing, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. The old man, encouraged by the silence, rambled on. "Ate here for a whole month, rain or shine. Said it was the best wanton in the city. Had us all believing you were a romantic." After the man left, tossing a few coins into the tin, the silence returned, heavier than before. The truth the old man had casually unearthed hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. I finally broke the silence, my voice cold and flat. "You ate here for a whole month because you needed Uncle Arthur's investment. You played the part of the lovesick suitor because you saw a path to my family's connections. From start to finish, you never loved me, David. Your whole life amounts to nothing but playing a part." For a moment he looked genuinely stricken. The carefully constructed armor of his arrogance cracked. "That's not true," he protested, but the words sounded hollow even to him. He glanced at the wontons simmering in the pot, then at the ones I had deliberately dumped into the scrap bin, a symbol of wasted effort and discarded love. He let out a laugh that was uglier than crying. "So the extra 5% of shares you demanded, that was revenge too." I finally looked up, meeting his eyes across the steam rising from the stall. I arched an eyebrow, my expression one of pure, cold mockery. What else did you think it was, David? Did you think I bargained with you because I couldn't cut ties? Because I still carried some pathetic torch for you? I shook my head slowly. No. That 5% is simply what you owe me. It's the price of the wontons you never really tasted, and the heart you never really wanted. The defeat in his eyes was complete. It was more than the loss of a business negotiation. It was the annihilation of his entire narrative. He had convinced himself that my actions were driven by a lingering, desperate love, that my revenge was a perverted form of passion. Now he saw it for what it was. A cold, calculated repossession. As I turned to pack up the stall, my movements final, I heard him murmur behind me, so softly I almost missed it over the city's din. Maya. I think I regret it. The words hung in the cold air. I paused, but I didn't look back. What use was regret now? It was a currency as worthless as the counterfeit love he'd given me. Some things once broken can't be fixed. They can only be thrown away. I kept walking, leaving him standing alone in the shadows under the bridge, a lonely figure surrounded by the ghosts of his own ambition. The divorce was signed the next day in his lawyer's sterile office. He slid the agreement across the polished table, his fingertip lingering for a second on the paper. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out version of his former condescension. Maya, he said, his tone that of a man granting a favor. Don't be stubborn. If you ever need money, just come to me. I didn't even look up as I signed my name with a sharp, definitive flourish. I had what I wanted. The 5% of Titan Capital, a stake that, combined with Uncle Arthur's holdings, gave us controlling interest. The money was irrelevant. I was a Sharma. I had never needed his money. I think I'll manage, I said, standing up. I didn't offer a handshake. I didn't say goodbye. I simply walked out, the door clicking shut behind me, sealing the end of that chapter of my life. The news of David and Chloe's impending wedding spread through the city like a virus. It was a brazen act, a giant middle finger to propriety and a declaration that they had won. They gave interviews, painting themselves as star-crossed lovers who had triumphed over the obstacles of a spiteful ex-Chloe, in a stunning act of audacity, clutched a barely there baby bump during a televised segment, her eyes glistening with manufactured tears. It hasn't been easy for us to come this far, she sobbed, while David looked on with protective solemnity. The performance was nauseating. The day of the wedding I dressed with deliberate simplicity. A sheath dress the color of ashes. I was not there to compete. I was there to witness. Mark had invited me, his message brief. The show will be worth it. The venue was a cathedral of obscene wealth, all white orchids and crystal chandeliers. When I walked in, heads turned. Chloe, resplendent in a lace-covered monstrosity, saw me and her face tightened, a flicker of pure panic in her eyes before she forced a smile. She looked like a child playing dress-up in a stolen gown. The ceremony began. They exchanged vows, their voices ringing with false sincerity. Just as the priest was about to pronounce them man and wife, the heavy oak doors of the venue burst open. Mark stood there, silhouetted against the daylight. Every camera in the room swiveled toward him. He didn't rush, he walked down the aisle with a deliberate, terrifying calm. Chloe shrieked and hid behind David. Mark. Get out. This has nothing to do with you. Mark didn't even look at her. He stopped at the foot of the altar and pulled a folded document from his inside jacket pocket. He didn't hand it to David, he threw it at his feet. Mr. Roy, Mark's voice, cold and clear, echoed in the stunned silence. Take a good look. David, his face a mask of fury and confusion, bent to pick it up. It was a medical report. Mark's voice cut through the air like a scalpel. Her uterus was removed last year. Total hysterectomy. 4 years she's been sleeping with rich men, getting pregnant, and having abortions to squeeze them for money. 3 times a year she was in that clinic. The doctors finally told her she'd destroy herself. So she had it all taken out. He pointed a finger at Chloe, who was trembling violently. And then she turned around and lied to you. She's not pregnant, David. She's barren. And she's been playing you for a fool. He gestured to the large screen at the front of the venue, which should have been showing romantic pictures of the couple. Instead, it began to play a montage of surveillance footage. Chloe entering hotels with a series of different middle-aged men. The timestamps overlapped with the early days of her affair with David. "Look carefully," Mark said, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is the woman you gave up everything for. You threw away a woman like Maya for a common whore who slept her way through this city." The hall erupted. The silence shattered into a cacophony of gasps, shouts, and the frantic clicking of cameras. Chloe's face was a grotesque mask of terror. "It's not true. He's lying. He's taking revenge." David stared at the medical report in his hand, his eyes scanning the damning words. "Total hysterectomy." His gaze dropped to Chloe's stomach. In one violent, brutal motion he yanked up the front of her wedding gown. The padding she had used to simulate a pregnancy tumbled to the floor. Her belly was flat. The room descended into chaos. The illusion was shattered. The beautiful lie was exposed in all its ugly, pathetic reality. I sat in the front row and slowly, deliberately I began to clap. The sound was sharp and isolated, cutting through the noise. It was the only applause they would receive that day. David's eyes found mine. The hatred in them was absolute, but beneath it was something else. The dawning horror of his own stupidity. At that moment his assistant, a young man named Jeremy, stumbled down the aisle, his face ashen. "Mr. Roy," he gasped, holding out a tablet. "Mr. Reed, he's dumped all his shares. Combined with Ms. Sharma's 5%, it's triggered a panic. The stock, it's hitting limit down." I met David's devastated gaze across the wreckage of his wedding. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "I told you my revenge was just beginning, David," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but he read my lips. Lily's downfall was her own doing. I orchestrated. He stood there, surrounded by the ruins of his marriage, his company, and his reputation. He finally understood. The wanton stall, the divorce, the shares, it was never about winning him back. It was about systematically dismantling him. "From the very beginning," he said, his voice hoarse with disbelief, "you never planned to let me go, did you?" I looked straight into the abyss of his eyes and gave no reply. The answer was written in the ashes of the life he had chosen to burn. The fallout from the wedding was a financial tsunami that swallowed Titan Capital whole. The limit-down trading halt was just the beginning. The stock became radioactive. Uncle Arthur's very public divestment was a signal to the market, a verdict of guilty handed down from the highest court of finance. Panicked retail investors dumped their shares in a blind frenzy, and institutional funds pulled their support, not wanting to be associated with the toxic spectacle David and Chloe had become. I watched it all from the serene, soundproofed office Uncle Arthur had given me in his own corporate headquarters. It was a world away from the chaos I had unleashed. Screens flickered with falling graphs and panicked news tickers, all chronicling the implosion of David's empire. It was a strange, detached feeling, like watching a building you'd once lived in collapse from a safe distance. There was no joy, only a cold, quiet satisfaction. The scales were balancing. David, in a desperate attempt to appear in control, tried to project an image of resilience. He gave a press conference, pale and strained, with a hollow-eyed Chloe standing silently by his side. He spoke of overcoming personal challenges and the fundamental strength of Titan Capital's core business. It was a performance of stunning denial. The reporters, smelling blood, ignored the script. "Mr. Roy, is it true your new wife faked her pregnancy? Can you comment on the allegations that your marriage is a sham? How do you respond to shareholders who say you've breached your fiduciary duty through your personal conduct?" He had no answers. The conference dissolved into a shambles. That night, the board of directors, fearing a complete wipeout of their own investments, voted to remove him as CEO. The email announcing his resignation to pursue other opportunities was the final, merciful bullet. He was finished. A week after the wedding I received a visitor at my hotel. It was Chloe. The transformation was shocking. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting tracksuit. Her face, devoid of its usual layers of makeup, was puffy and pale, etched with a new, permanent anxiety. She looked like a ghost of the woman who had smugly shattered my bracelet. She didn't meet my eyes. "Maya," she whispered, her voice raspy. "Please. You have to help me." I said nothing, simply waited. The silence forced her to continue. He's not the man I thought he was," she stammered, wringing her hands. "He blames me for everything. He's broke. The lawyers. The lawsuits, they're taking everything. My family, they won't even speak to me. She finally looked up and her eyes were those of a terrified animal. You were my best friend. Please, help me one last time. Just enough to get away. I looked at her, this woman who had been a sister to me. I remembered the hospital years ago when her father was sick. She had clutched my hand, her tears soaking my shirt. Once my father gets better, I'll repay you 1,000 times over, Maya. I swear it. All right, I said, my voice flat. Her face lit up with a pathetic hope. I reached into my bag and pulled out a train ticket. It was a one-way ticket to her rural hometown, a place she had spent her whole life trying to escape. I held it out to her. I'll send you home. The hope in her eyes died, replaced by a dawning horror. Home? You can't be serious. That's a death sentence. My mother, she'll. That's the offer, Chloe, I said, cutting her off. Take it or leave it. She stared at the ticket as if it were a venomous snake. Then, with a sob that seemed to tear itself from the depths of her soul, she snatched it from my hand and fled without another word. I later heard through the grapevine what happened. Her mother, seeing Chloe return in disgrace, saw not a daughter but a liability. The money I had indirectly given them, the same money that had paid for her father's surgery and her brother's apartment, had long since been spent. The old bachelor in the village, the one her father had owed money to, was still there. He renewed his offer, clear the debt by becoming his wife. This time, with no other options, her family agreed. I was told that on the day she was married off to the 70-year-old man, she cried so hard her voice gave out, cursing my name from the back of the ox cart that carried her to her new life. They said she called me cold-blooded and heartless. But cold-bloodedness isn't born. It's forged in the fire of betrayal. I had pulled her out of the swamp once, out of loyalty and love. She had chosen to drag me into the mud with her. So I simply did what was necessary. I sent her back to where she belonged. The debt was settled. With David and Chloe's story reaching its sordid conclusion, the media circus needed a new narrative. They found it in me. The mysterious, wronged wife who had orchestrated such a spectacular downfall. Speculation ran wild. Who was Maya Sharma really? Uncle Arthur advised a low profile. Let the dust settle, my dear. Your life is your own now. But a part of me wanted to reclaim my identity, not as David's victim but as myself. When an invitation arrived for the annual Hope and Future Charity Gala, one of the most exclusive events of the social calendar, I accepted. It was an event my parents had always attended, and one David had desperately coveted an invitation to but had never been deemed worthy. I wore a gown the color of a pale winter moon, a masterpiece of couture that whispered of old money and quiet confidence. On my wrist I wore a new bracelet, a stunning piece of emerald and platinum that my father had bought for me at a Sotheby's auction. It was a statement. It was me returned to myself. I was chatting with a group of business leaders, discussing a new philanthropic initiative, when a commotion broke out at the entrance. I turned to see David being physically restrained by 2 security guards. He was clutching a crumpled invitation, his face a mask of frantic desperation. His suit was cheap, the cuffs frayed. He had clearly pulled every last string to get in. His wild eyes scanned the glittering crowd and landed on me. The sequence of emotions that flashed across his face was a tragicomedy in 3 acts. First confusion, then dawning, horrified recognition, and finally, a flush of profound, soul-crushing humiliation. He broke free from the guards and stumbled toward me. Maya, he breathed, his voice trembling. He looked me up and down, from the elegant gown to the emerald bracelet that glittered under the chandeliers. Why are you here? And dressed like this? The man I had been speaking with, a venerable old chairman named Mr. Lee, chuckled softly. Maya, is this a friend from the less fortunate side of town? His tone was politely dismissive. David rushed to explain, his words tumbling over each other. She's my... He stopped. His eyes were locked on the emerald bracelet. I saw the moment he recognized it. He had once pored over antique jewelry magazines, dreaming of the status such objects represented. He knew its value. He knew it was worth more than the remnants of his entire company. He knew it, but he couldn't bring himself to say it. I was just leaving, I said, my voice calm and distant as if addressing a waiter. At that moment, Uncle Arthur walked over, leaning heavily on his cane. His expression was stern, his gaze fixed on David. "David," he said, his voice carrying a weight of final judgment. "This isn't a place for you. And it's time you learned the truth." He gestured to me. "Maya was never the daughter of a wanton vendor. Her father is Robert Sharma." The name landed in the hushed circle with the force of a bomb. Robert Sharma. David's eyes widened in utter disbelief. The name was legendary. The reclusive billionaire. The man whose influence could make or break empires. The man David had spent years trying to emulate, to impress. The man he had never once bothered to meet because he believed his wife came from a family of street sellers. He staggered back a step, his face ashen. "So back then," he stammered, the pieces of his life crashing together in a new, devastating configuration. "When you ran that stall, it wasn't to make a living." "What do you think?" I asked, my voice as cold as ice. I remembered his earnest promises when he was courting me. "Once I make enough money, I'll buy out your stall. You'll never have to stand in the wind and sun again." And I remembered the contempt in his voice when he later mocked me. "Look at her. So pitiful. Who else would want her but me?" Uncle Arthur sighed, a sound of deep, weary disappointment. "She hid her family, her wealth, everything to build a life with you. And you squandered that devotion as if it were nothing." David's composure broke. It wasn't a loud, dramatic collapse. It was silent and terrible. Tears welled in his eyes and began to stream down his face, not of manipulation, but of genuine, absolute despair. He looked at me, and the regret in his eyes was a bottomless chasm, a understanding of the monumental mistake he had made, of the life of power and love he had thrown away for a cheap fantasy. "Maya," he whispered, my name a plea on his lips. But I was done listening. I had heard enough of his lies, his excuses, his justifications. I turned my back on him. I turned my back on the ghost of the man I had loved, on the ruin he had become. I walked away, the whispers of the crowd fading behind me, the cool weight of the emerald bracelet a comforting reminder of who I was and where I came from. He called my name once more, a broken sound, but I didn't look back. Some ruins are not worth revisiting. The charity gala was the last time I saw David Roy in public. The image of him humiliated and weeping in that glittering hall became the final, enduring snapshot of his downfall. The press, ever fickle, moved on to new scandals. The story of the fallen financier and his fraudulent mistress was relegated to cautionary tales and business school case studies on reputational risk. For me, life began to assume a new, quieter rhythm. The rage that had sustained me through the months of revenge had burned itself out, leaving behind a landscape of calm, if somewhat barren, peace. I moved out of the hotel and into a light-filled apartment that overlooked the river, a space that was entirely, unequivocally mine. There were no ghosts here. I started working with my father not as a figurehead but in a strategic role at Sharma Holdings. It was a homecoming I had never anticipated. The years I had spent with David, though built on a lie, had given me a unique insight into the cutthroat world of venture capital and corporate maneuvering. My father, a man of few words but immense wisdom, was pleasantly surprised. "You have a killer instinct, Maya," he said one day after I'd deconstructed a rival's proposal with surgical precision. "A shame it was wasted on that situation." I didn't think of it as wasted. It was a brutal education, but an education nonetheless. Months passed. Winter settled over the city, draping it in a crisp, white silence. I was in my office, reviewing architectural plans for a new children's hospital the foundation was funding, when my phone rang. It was Mark. His voice was calm, but there was an odd formality to it. "Why? It's about David." I felt a strange stillness settle over me. Not anxiety, not sadness. Just a waiting stillness. "What about him?" "He was found this morning. In a flop house on the outskirts of the city. The official cause is hypothermia, but he'd been drinking heavily. It seems he passed out in an alley and never woke up." I was silent, absorbing the information. I pictured it. The expensive suit replaced by rags, the arrogant posture curled against the cold, the handsome face bloated and frozen. It was a pathetic, undignified end. A far cry from the future he had once painted for us under the cherry blossom trees. "I see," I said finally. "Thank you for telling me, Mark." "There's no family to claim the body," he continued, his tone neutral. "The state will handle it. That's probably for the best." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Are you all right? I looked out the window at the snow falling on the city, covering the grime and the glory in a blanket of pure white. I felt a faint, distant pang, not for the man he became, but for the ghost of the man I had once thought he was. The ambitious, brilliant senior who had talked about poetry and believed he could conquer the world. I mourned that illusion. Yes, Mark, I said, my voice clear and steady. I'm all right. I hung up the phone and went back to the architectural plans. The world kept turning. Life demanded to be lived. A few days later, a small package arrived at my office. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in plain tissue paper, was a man's silver cufflink. It was simple, elegant, and I recognized it immediately. It was part of a set I had given David for our first anniversary, engraved with his initials. A note was scrawled on a piece of cheap notebook paper. Found among his things. Thought you should have it. No one else to give it to. A caretaker. I held the cold piece of metal in my palm. It was the last tangible fragment of our life together. A life that was now as dead and gone as he was. I walked to the window and looked down at the river flowing inexorably toward the sea. I thought about regret, about roads not taken, about the devastating power of choices. Then I opened my hand and let the cufflink fall into the wastebasket. It landed with a soft, final thud. There was no funeral. No memorial. David Roy simply vanished from the world as if he had never been. His company was absorbed by a competitor, its name erased from the stock exchange. Chloe was lost to the obscurity of a remote village, her fate a tragedy of her own making. The story was over. One evening, Uncle Arthur came over for dinner. We sat by the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. It's done then, he said, sipping his brandy. It's done, I agreed. He studied me for a long moment. You're not like your mother, you know, he said. She was all fire and passion. You have her strength, but it's a colder fire. A more lasting one. I smiled faintly. I had a good teacher. He nodded, understanding. We sat in comfortable silence, the only sound the crackling of the logs. The past was a closed book. The future was a blank page. And for the first time in a very long time, the present felt like enough. Spring arrived, gentle and tentative. The ice on the river thawed, and the city breathed a sigh of relief. On a bright Saturday morning, on a whim, I had my driver take me to the old neighborhood under the bridge. I hadn't been there since that last fateful night with David. To my surprise, the wanton stall was there. Not my old rusty trike, but a newer, cleaner version. A young couple was running it, their faces bright with effort and hope. The smell was the same, the rich, savory broth, the scent of fresh dough. It was a living thread connecting the present to my past, to my grandmother. I got out of the car and walked over. 2 bowls, please, I said. The young woman smiled, her hands moving with a familiar, practiced grace. As she ladled the broth, I looked around. The city had changed, grown taller, but this spot under the bridge was stubbornly the same. I could almost see the ghost of a younger me laughing with Uncle Arthur. I could see the shadow of David, playing his part with devastating sincerity. The woman handed me the bowls, steaming and fragrant. I paid her, adding a generous tip. Business is good? I asked. Getting there, the young man said, wiping his brow. It's a dream, you know. To have our own place someday. I nodded. I know. I took the bowls and walked to the nearby park, finding an empty bench overlooking the water. I sat there in the warm spring sun and ate the wontons. They were good. Not exactly like my grandmother's, but close enough. The taste was a Proustian Madeleine, flooding me with memories, not of pain and betrayal but of simpler times. Of love that was real even if it was built on a lie. I had won. I had my revenge. I had reclaimed my name, my fortune, my life. David was gone. Chloe was gone. The war was over. So why did victory taste so much like nostalgia and so little like triumph? I realized then that revenge is not a destination where you find happiness. It is a medicine, a bitter, necessary antibiotic that kills an infection. But once the infection is gone, you are left with the body weakened, scarred, but clean. The work of healing, of building a new life, begins only after the last battle is won. As I sat there, finishing the last of the broth, a sense of peace, fragile but genuine, settled over me. The past was a story I had survived. The future was mine to write. I was Maya Sharma. Not a victim, not an avenger. Just a woman sitting on a park bench on a spring morning, tasting the past and finally ready to face the future. I stood up, tossed the empty containers into a bin and walked back to the car. The sun was warm on my face. The city was alive around me. It was time to go home. The end.